You have found a recording of a Planning Well event hosted by the Bethlehem Lutheran Church Foundation in Minneapolis, Minnesota. This is a conversation about faith, family, and legacy. The Bethlehem Foundation is committed to engage people of all ages with regard to estate and legacy planning. This is our first event presented and recorded via the Zoom platform. We are glad to have you along on our adventure. You will notice that occasionally you see a photograph instead of a video stream, and that edits some technical issues with the video. The presenters are Sandra Anderson, a current Foundation board member, and her longtime colleague in the wills and trust arena, Barbara Christensen. At one point, Gwen Branstad, also a current Foundation board member, answers a question and offers information. All three women are members of the Bethlehem Lutheran Church Twin Cities faith community. Thank you very much for joining us.
It's better for us, actually, if you ask questions while we go, rather than waiting for the very end. Sometimes by the end, my particular train of thought has left that station, so I might not be able to get back to what you're asking about. I think that's all I have for now. I think I'll just turn this over to Barbara to begin the estate planning adventure.
Thank you, Sandy. So I thought we'd start out with just briefly what estate planning is and some of the documents that are involved in kind of a basic estate plan. And so for this, hope you don't mind, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, because this is the best way for me to be able to describe the various documents that are in an estate plan. Can everybody see this up on the screen? It's supposed to be a timeline of the various documents that are applicable in an estate plan, when they're good for. And what I like about this is it also shows the name of the person who is in charge of handling each of these documents, because I think that gets really confusing. So this first one shows a plan that includes a revocable trust. I'll go over one that includes a will as the main driving document. A revocable trust, sometimes people call this a living trust, to sort of communicate that as soon as you sign it, this revocable or living trust is an ongoing entity. The nice thing about a revocable trust, and what this tries to show, is that during different periods of somebody's lifetime and after their death, the idea is that the revocable trust just keeps going. We don't have to stop at any point. So when the document is signed, that's when we begin the trust. During a period of a person's incapacity, it continues on at death, and then through the period of estate administration. When we need to build trusts for beneficiaries, whether that's for some tax reasons or because the beneficiaries really couldn't or shouldn't handle their own money, then we build the language for that trust inside of the revocable trust document. So there's just one document and it covers this whole time period. With the revocable trust plan, you also have a will. The will does very little heavy lifting, because all the heavy lifting is done by the revocable trust. The will basically says, if I forgot to put something in my trust during my lifetime, go ahead, put it in my trust after I'm gone, and then have the revocable trust rules and all of that document control what happens. The other two documents that I think are really important for any basic estate plan are a power of attorney, a financial power of attorney. It's really intended to be used during a period of incapacity. People think of it as helping with bill pay or investments, that kind of thing. But it is good as soon as somebody signs it, and it's really important to understand. The person under your power of attorney is called your agent or your power of attorney. And then the fourth document is called your healthcare directive. And in Minnesota, this combines two ideas. So the first is naming the person who would make your medical decisions for you if you're not able to make them for yourself. And then the second is what we would call the living will portion, or the instructions for what you would want to have happen if you weren't able to speak for yourself, just from a medical. Nothing to do with finances, just medical. When we have just a will, then your will does most of the heavy lifting about who gets what, who's in charge, how your estate administration goes. And then in that place, you'd be down to 3 documents: your healthcare directive, your power of attorney, and your will. What's the difference between these 2 plans? Basically, whether or not your estate is going to need a probate. Probate gets a bad reputation. I know there was a book written I think it was the 1960s, about the horrors of probate in California, still true in California. But in Minnesota, probate isn't a terrible, terrible thing. It's not horribly expensive. It does take a couple of months to get rolling because we are worried, we're working with, the court system, which is not exactly well funded these days. So we do have some delays in getting started with the administration, but in general, probate is nothing to be scared of. When attorneys try to scare people away from having a plan that has probate, I don't like that. I think that there's a couple of reasons why you shouldn't have a probate. If you've got real estate in more than one state, so you've got a cabin in Wisconsin, then we end up doing a couple of probates. That's not great. If you have some privacy concerns, so you don't want information about your estate getting out into the public, or there's family members that shouldn't be notified of your death, then that's maybe another reason to avoid probate. Another one is if you have a condition that means that you're likely to have a long period of incapacity. So, sometimes a cancer diagnosis, an Alzheimer's diagnosis, those kinds of things that lead us to need a more robust plan for your incapacity. That's a reason to go with a revocable trust plan. But otherwise, probate, like I said, in Minnesota is not terribly complex, not terribly expensive, and not horribly time consuming. I'm going to stop there because I want to turn this back over to Sandy to talk about the distribution. And this really is a key, either if you have a revocable trust plan or you have a will-based plan. The question, and I think the question we really want to focus on here, is how do we leave that legacy? Whether that's to our family members, whether that's totally or in part to charities. How are we going to do that? Obviously, the will, the revocable trust, that can be the mechanism to get us there. But I want to have Sandy discuss her situation because I think she has just one of the most fascinating, and I share it all the time with clients. I hope she doesn't mind what she has decided to do with her estate plan. So I will turn it back over to Sandy. I will stop the sharing on the screen and I will mute myself.
Before I take this over, I think that there was a question in the chat. I think it was, what is the difference between a will and a pour over will? Can you do that one for me? And you're muted right now.
As my computer is telling me, stop talking, you're muted. So a pour over will is a type of will. A will is the document that says if you have an asset that is a probate asset, meaning at the time of your death, it is just in your name. There's no beneficiary designation. It's not in the name of a trust. It's not joint with somebody who survives you. That's when we have a probate asset. So a will says what happens with those probate assets. The pour over will is just a type of will, and it says, go ahead and pour it over into my revocable trust. So it's the type of will that we pair when we have a revocable trust. But honestly, it's just a type of will.
Okay, and let's do one more question if we can. How do trustees of a trust make decisions? Must there be agreement, or how does that work?
It depends on what the trust document says or what the will says. So Minnesota law recently changed in 2016, which I guess isn't very recent, but recent for us. It used to be that if the trust document didn't say otherwise, it had to be by the unanimous decision of the trustees. So if there were 3 trustees, all 3 trustees had to agree. Now the default has changed and it's majority rules, but your document can override that. So you can say in your trust document, I want to name these 3 people and they all have to work together. I want to name these 3 people and only one of them needs to act. I will talk you out of that. That's not a good idea. Or majority roles. Did that answer the question, Bill?
I'll have to go back to my own documents and figure out how that's written. It's just kind of awkward because you've got some, people in your family and you think, well, it's revocable. Well, it's revocable from my perspective, but
Yes.
if somebody in my family who is also listed as a trustee has a difference of opinion, believe me, I want my opinion to rule in this case. So I've got to check that. Thank you.
Yes, remember revocable trusts are only revocable as to you. And so once you are gone or no longer able to revoke the document, it technically becomes irrevocable. And trustees have some discretion, but they do need to follow the rules that are set out in your trust document. So people often say, well, what happens if they have a difference of opinion on how things should be distributed? Well, that's too bad. You've set down the rules. This would be the same thing. If your document says you need to act by unanimous consent of all the trustees, that's the rule they have to follow.
Okay, thank you.
I would just add to that, if you intend to make your 3 children your trustees, and your 3 children don't get along now, making them your trustees is not going to make them get along. And it's going to create enormous problems for the estate. So naming your trustees is a really important thing. I just had that to say because
Thank you.
been there on that one and done that. Okay. Barbara suggested that I talk about the distribution aspects. Most people, leave their estate to their children or their families or something like that. Many people are interested in supporting the church, their alma mater, or another organization in their estate plans. Barbara always pushes me to tell my personal story, so I will. Many years ago, Gordy Olson and I attended a week-long workshop sponsored by Thrivent, and it was around development and estate planning and legacy gifting. And there was one presenter who I thought was incredibly obnoxious. He was the development officer for a Lutheran school somewhere, maybe in Illinois. And he talked about making an effort to talk to each of the parents about including the school in their estate plans. And he said he would make an appointment to see them in their homes, sit in the living room, and tell them if they wanted to set an example for their kids that would encourage them to love God and continue their schooling, all they had to do was adopt Jesus and include him as one of their own children in their estate. It was actually pretty smarmy, snake oil kind of pitch. I found it really pretty offensive. Gordy and I talked about it several times that night. But you know what? It made me think. And so maybe because I'm adopted, but this burrowed around in my head. And eventually I talked to my husband, who is not church, and he saw the reasons and the benefits in doing that. So our estate plan splits 3 ways: one for our son, one for our deceased son's family, and one that will divide to 3 charities important to both of us, including the Bethlehem Foundation, which of course is why I'm here talking about this. I'm often asked if people should give to the foundation of the church. We are actually separate organizations. We are separate 501c3s. My answer is always that I personally don't care, but I'm very grateful for either. A gift to the church usually supports the operating budget or can sometimes be directed to a specific program like music or kids. A gift to the foundation is invested with the other assets, and each year between 4 and 8% of the assets are used to support the mission and vision of the church. So either way, you are supporting the church. It's just a difference in how quickly the money's available to be spent. And at the foundation, the money grows. At the church level, it probably will be spent within a few years. We always have outreach grants for organizations connected to the church through our own members, like LPGM or My Very Own Bed. So if I put that in your head now, you can choose to give to both. We're very grateful for your generosity. I don't think I have much else to say about that, except just making those choices wisely and then being sure that you document them appropriately. I also am often asked, what's the easiest way to give a gift? And the answer, in my opinion, and Barbara can just cheerfully chime in with me if she wants to, I think that the easiest way to give a gift without changing all your documents is to change your beneficiary designation on your IRA, on a bank account, on just a beneficiary designation on an insurance policy. That is a really easy way to give a gift to a charity without having to change your whole estate plan. Barbara, do you have anything else you think we should say about that?
Well, of course, I have to chime in with the tax talk. Because that's my favorite. So I'm always in favor, especially of if you want to give to charities, having it go through your retirement account, because charities will get those dollars, dollar for dollar. Your kids, your other beneficiaries won't. They're going to be paying income tax on it. And since the new law passed, it's even worse than it used to be, where most of the time we have to, when we inherit an IRA, we have to take that out within 10 years. So all of that taxable income from a retirement account is going to be need to be recognized by the beneficiaries within 10 years. And it can really mess with the beneficiaries' tax rates. You know, they're making them go kind of sky high. So when charities receive those dollars and individuals receive the sale proceeds from your house or your life insurance policy, those are not taxable. And so they're getting those dollar for dollar. The charity is getting your IRA dollar for dollar. So that's the best bang for your buck, in my opinion, is to have any charitable gifts come from your retirement account. And like Sandy said, it's usually really easy to add those because all you're doing is going online typically and changing your beneficiary designation to add that charity. So that's what I will say on that. I think since there are so few people online, I'd like to just kind of take a poll and see where it would be helpful for us to talk about next. Some things I kind of have on my list that I could discuss. If you guys are interested in me going over the basics of the estate tax, I'm happy to do that. If you want to talk about trusts for beneficiaries, more on the other documents, the power of attorney, the healthcare directive, I'm happy to do that as well. I don't know if there's anybody that has a specific issue that they wanted to make sure was addressed tonight.
Barbara, RMDs and QCDs when one turns 73?
So that is a question, I think, about required minimum distributions on retirement accounts. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I can answer some of that. Gwen's on the line too. She's probably more up to date with what exactly those are. Yes. So I'm going to guess the question is when you turn a certain age and that age is changing with that Secure Act, you do have to take required minimum distributions. Where I actually get involved is really not with that, but what happens when the owner of a retirement account passes away and the beneficiary has to take that over. Those rules are really, really complex, so I won't get into any of the nitty-gritty, even if I could. But the basic rule is that a beneficiary, unless they're a minor or a disabled person or fall into another couple of categories and they're not the spouse, they have to take out that money within 10 years. You've got 10 years to take all of that money, all of that inherited IRA out. If you are a spouse of the person who owned the account, then you can roll it over into your own, and that typically has the best tax advantages. So if my husband passes away, I inherit his retirement account. I get to take that on as my own retirement account, spread it out over my life expectancy instead of being stuck with that 10 years. Dennis, I'm not sure if that answered your question.
I can address that too to some degree, Barbara. The required minimum distributions are usually calculated by the organization that holds the IRA. And so, for example, mine's with Schwab, and every year they tell me this is how much you have to take out next year. If you don't take it, there's a penalty. There's always a penalty with the IRS. So if you don't take it, there's a penalty. And I think that has changed. It used to be much more onerous, but I think it's now 10% of what you were supposed to take. So we need to take it. The QCD is an interesting thing. If you make a qualified charitable distribution, which is a QCD, like if I make a gift to Bethlehem Church, that is not reportable on my taxes, even though I've taken it against my required minimum distribution. So that essentially makes my charitable contributions tax deductible, if you will. I think that that's a wonderful thing. And all of my charitable contributions are made through the QCD. There are a couple of ways to do that. I think many firms require you to instruct the firm that holds your retirement account to make that charitable distribution. Like you have to call them up and say, or send them a letter or whatever it is, and say, I want $5,000 to go to Bethlehem Lutheran Church. And then they will send it eventually. I have, this is a little bit of a commercial, but I have my IRA with Schwab, and I actually have check blanks against my IRA. And so when I want to make a charitable contribution, I write a check. That takes care of it. So now I'm going to say, Dennis, did that take care of your questions about RMD and QCD? I think I covered it all.
Yes, it did. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. But that was a good question. Thank you for asking it. And Barbara, I think Jean wanted to know a little bit more about estate tax.
Could I add just one little thing?
Yeah, absolutely.
You're correct in saying that when you do a QCD, at your age, when you have required minimum distributions, it counts toward those required minimum distributions. But it might be of interest for people to know that QCDs can start at age 70 and a half. They haven't caught up with the RMD age. So you can start utilizing that capability at age 70 and a half.
Thank you, Gwen. That was great. I actually did not know that because I am long past 70 and a half.
I'm happy to talk about estate tax. And to do that, I'm going to see if I can bring up this whiteboard.
Barbara, before you do that, Bill has one more question about QCD. Maybe we should just do that before we move on to the taxes.
Okay.
Sandy, you were talking about this check capability that
Yeah.
to write checks against your QC against your RMD.
Yes.
And so do you get a report at the end of the year that, I mean, let's say you've got to take $50,000 out of your minimum distribution is 50,000. Will you get a report that might tell you what give you a list of all the contributions that you can use with your tax return?
I do not. I get a report that just tells me how much I took against the RMD or how much I took. So if it happened that I took $52,000, it would tell me that. And they start telling me in November if it looks like I'm going to be below.
Okay.
Okay. But I don't get a list of the charitables that I made. But because it's a check, I have a check register that.
Oh, that makes sense. Thank
Yeah.
you.
If I could jump in, I haven't seen that reporting happen anywhere. It's still on it's the onus of the person making those gifts to keep track of them and then tell their tax person what dollars were actually QCD, unfortunately.
But the canceled check is the evidence.
Mhm.
Okay.
Okay, now we'll move on to taxes, Barbara.
All right, so estate taxes. Since we live here in the great state of Minnesota, we have to worry about estate taxes when an individual or a married couple together has more than $3 million. Under the federal system, we don't have to worry about it until it's about $15 million. So these days, very, very few people are worried about the federal estate tax, but Minnesota hits not as hard, but it does hit much earlier in somebody's estate than the federal. So what happens when, and you're going to see that I was not an art major and definitely not one on Zoom. If a husband and a wife have estates and one of them passes away and they give the survivor the entirety of the estate, what we've done is we've pushed everything down the hill. And so just for very, very simple math, if spouse one has $3 million, boy, I am doing a bang up job on this, and spouse number two also has $3 million worth of assets. Well, when spouse number one dies and pushes everything to spouse number two, we've now got an estate of $6 million. And unfortunately, at least under the Minnesota system, boy, this is harder than I thought it was. It's easier on my iPad. There's no sharing. So if the first spouse that dies doesn't use that $3 million freebie that Minnesota has given them, we've lost it. And so under this scenario, we would have about almost $200,000 worth of estate tax. So when this situation comes up and we've got a couple with more than $3 million when you add everything together, that tells me that we need to start at least thinking about whether or not to add some estate tax provisions into their estate planning documents. And just to be very clear, these provisions can be added whether you have a will as your driving document or a revocable trust. So a lot of people say, well, a trust saves taxes. A revocable trust does not in and of itself save estate taxes. You have to build in a trust under that revocable trust to save the estate taxes. I'll show you how that's done. But the same kind of trust can be built into a will as well. So there's nothing magical about having a revocable trust that saves estate taxes. So instead of saying, I'm giving you, my spouse, everything that I have, what we say is, if I'm the first person to pass away, I'm going to delete this so I've got more room. If I'm the first person to pass away, I'm not just going to give you my assets directly. I'm going to create under my will or under my revocable trust what we tend to call in our office a family trust. And I'm going to give my assets down to the family trust. You, my lovely spouse, can be the beneficiary of this trust. You can be the trustee. You can decide how things are invested. You can decide whether or not distributions are made to you, but you are not going to have this money just plopped into your lap. It's going to go into this separate entity called a family trust. And the idea is that when my spouse passes away, I haven't made his estate any bigger for estate taxes because my $3 million went down into this family trust. And when he passes away, this family trust is going to go on to our beneficiaries, whomever that might be, free of any estate taxes. So if this thing grows to $4 or $5 million, fantastic. The whole thing will go out free of estate taxes. So that is basic estate tax planning. And again, it's something that we need to include when we have a situation where a married couple has more than $3 million when you add everything together. What do I include in that everything? I include everything. Your house, your retirement accounts, your life insurance. So a lot of people say, but life insurance is tax-free. And I say, well, it's income tax-free, but it's not estate tax-free. Business interests, all the things that we own are going to be included in that dollar amount to determine whether or not we're hitting the estate taxes. I think I'll take this down one further. So what happens when when the surviving spouse passes away. Sandy already discussed what happens or what can happen, how you can include the charities. The other piece that I think we just need to address is what happens with beneficiaries, and when do beneficiaries also need an irrevocable trust? And there's really three reasons I think why beneficiaries need to have a trust. Number one, as my colleague says, they're too young and too dumb to have the money just plopped into their laps. I think that with this generation, anybody under 30, we should be considering that they have a trust, because kids are just taking a little bit longer to launch these days to gain that financial maturity that they need to handle an inheritance. When I started this job, 25 was kind of the key age where people started to give out to their kids and say, you don't need this trust any longer. But I'm seeing that being upped to age 30. So too young and too dumb. We've got kids that are doing quite the opposite. They're doing gangbusters. They've got a very high asset level themselves. Well, just like with if I die and I give everything to my spouse, I push things down the hill to him, he's going to have an estate tax issue. That works the other way too. So if we've got kids that have a large earning capacity, we can increase the size of their estate by giving them an inheritance. And sometimes that doesn't make sense. And then the third reason is because we've got some other kind of concern. We've got a creditor concern, we've got a drug, alcohol, gambling addiction, all of those things that we kind of think about. The number one creditor concern that most parents have is actually an ex-spouse. And so I have a lot of clients who come to me and say, I'm just not real happy with the way that my kid's marriage is going. I see this ending in disaster, and I don't want my son-in-law or my daughter-in-law to walk away with half of the inheritance. And so the fix there is to say, okay, we're not going to give the child their inheritance outright, even if they're financially mature, but we're going to put it into a trust, because that's going to force them to keep that money separate, so that in the event of a divorce, there's not as much likelihood that a judge would take money from that inherited account and give it to the in-law. So those are the reasons why we talk about trust for kids, especially, or other beneficiaries. And those are kind of the three reasons that I have. Any questions on trusts for beneficiaries or how those are set up? Anything you want to add to that, Sandy? You've seen more trust in your career than I have, for sure.
No, I think I would go back to what I said at the beginning. If you have people who are going to receive money who don't get along, be very careful how you set that up, because they're not going to get along any better after you pass than they are right now. And that's kids, that's brothers and sisters, whatever it is. You know, I just have seen so many really nasty family fights about that. Okay, Jean has a question. So a family trust and a beneficiary trust should be made now. I'll let Barbara really talk to that, but I think your estate documents should reflect that that's what you want to have happen. You can't do it after you die. You can't change it. So be sure that you get it done correctly before you get to that point. Barbara, can you?
I use the example that my colleague often uses, which is these documents, in particular, your will and your revocable trust, are basically a blueprint. And what you're doing right now when you're alive and you're drafting these documents is to set out that blueprint. But you're not actually building most of the rooms now. You're just saying, if this thing happens, then I'm leaving the instructions for your trustee, your personal representative, to build the room after you're gone. So as an example, in my revocable trust plan, it says, if I am the first person to pass away, then go ahead and build this family trust for my spouse. If I'm the second person to pass away, then go ahead and build these rooms for my children, and give this money to charity. So we're not creating these irrevocable trusts for beneficiaries right now. We're just laying the framework and saying, if this thing happens, then somebody else is going to build it for me. But to Sandy's point, you have to leave those instructions, because if you don't leave the instructions, then the building can't happen. I think the next thing to go over would be who is in charge of each of these documents, and Sandy's kind of started this conversation with maybe who should be named under each of these documents. So when I look at the jobs, and I can put this document back up perhaps, of the various jobs that we have. And I'm going to show the revocable trust plan just because it's got one more job in there. So the job of the trustee under a revocable trust, the power of attorney under the power of attorney, and the personal representative under the will. In my mind, those job descriptions are very, very similar. Different documents, but very similar job descriptions. And the key person for each of these jobs would be somebody who is financially responsible. I don't need them to be a doctor I don't need them to be a lawyer or a financial person or a CPA, but I do need them to understand the basics of investing, the basics of keeping track of what you're spending, to be able to balance a checkbook. Those things they need to be able to do, even if it's not their main job. I need them to be trustworthy. Obviously, it's right in the name of the trustee. I need them to be organized. And almost most importantly, I need them to have the time and the energy to do this job, because it can be a full-time job, especially when we're talking about that period of administration, that year to 2 years following somebody's death, when we're doing the actual work of the administration. I need them to have the time and the energy to do that. And if you pick somebody who's too busy, it's not going to go very well. Sometimes people ask if they need to be close to Minnesota to do the job, and I say not necessarily. We learned a lot during COVID about how to do things remotely, but I do need somebody who would be able to be boots on the ground for at least time periods. So to clean out the home, sometimes to meet with us and get things organized, it's important that they be able to come here to Minnesota. But if you've got a really great person who's in Arizona or Ohio, I would rather have that person be doing the estate administration work than somebody who was in Minnesota that didn't have the time, the inclination, or the skill set to do that. I'm going to turn this back over to Sandy too, because like I said, she's got a lot of experience in this area too.
Yeah, well, actually, Bill has a good question here. He says he has assigned someone legally as his power of attorney, but this ends when he dies. So then how is the estate administrator named?
Yeah, so that's where your will or your revocable trust picks up. So you're absolutely correct, Bill. A power of attorney by Minnesota statute ends with your death, and then your personal representative under your will picks that up. If you have a revocable trust plan, then that's kind of overlaid over top of everything, and your trustee will probably take on the vast majority of the work that's involved with your estate administration.
So the term trustee can include this estate administrator.
Yes, if you have a revocable trust. So the trustee is the person who's in charge during your lifetime. Typically with a revocable trust plan, you are your own trustee for as long as you can do that job, as long as you have capacity. As soon as you lose capacity or your death, then the successor trustee takes over. The other kind of role of trustee that we talk about is when you've got a beneficiary who needs an ongoing trust to handle their inheritance. It's the person who will be in charge of handling that child, that beneficiary's inheritance.
Okay, thanks.
And this was what I did when I worked at Wells Fargo. I was a trust administrator. That's why Barbara and I have this close relationship. Um, the the that you don't have to have a bank or a financial institution named as your trust administrator. It can keep things a lot cleaner because they do all the bookkeeping and all the nitpicking work. And they can also kind of head off any weird things that might happen. Um, I had a client who passed away, and her grandson went to his dad and said, you know, Grandma promised that she would buy me a car, and she passed away before she did that. And the car I want is $62,000, and I need that money from the trust. And Dad said, okay, and then called me because I was the other side of the equation. I was the co-trustee at that point. And I said, oh, no, 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 that we can't do that. That's not, I mean, there's nothing in the trust that says the grandson gets $62,000. And so the trustees have to agree. So we kind of talked through that. And the dad said, well, that's kind of convenient because I didn't really want to give him the money anyway. I'm like, well, okay. So
Too young,
sometimes
too dumb.
having a financial institution named as the co-trustee, it solves a lot of problems in estate administration, and it takes a lot of pressure off the other co-trustee if that works. And I think a lot of people just don't understand how trusts work and what happens when people die. I have one more quick story and then maybe I'll give up on this part, but I had a client who was just a lovely woman, and her family all got along, and we hardly ever have, I mean, in the trust business, you hardly ever have all families get along. This was, you know, like the exception to the rule. And this woman lived until she was 98, and she passed away, and her son came in to see me, and he is a Lutheran pastor and the kindest, most gentle person in the world. And he said, Sandra, now that Mama's gone, we need to make some changes in her will. I'm like, now that Mama's gone, you can't change the will and you can't change the trust. Oh no, we have to. We've already said we're going to. I'm like, no. What's in the trust is in the trust. We can't change it at this point. And then I said, tell me what it is you're trying to do. Well, it turns out that the whole family had decided that they wanted to give a larger portion of the estate to the sister who was here in Minneapolis, who really took care of Mama. Even though she was in a nursing home, the sister went, you know, almost every day. She did all the shopping for what Mama needed and all that stuff. And they just felt like she should get a bigger chunk of the estate. And I said, you know, how much more do you think she should get? Well, we were thinking she should maybe get $50,000. And I said, well, that's really convenient because there are 6 of you, and the other 5 of you can each give her $10,000 without any sort of gift tax. So maybe that's the solution to this problem, because we can't actually change the trust. So you just have to have somebody kind of look at things and try to be a little bit creative about how you can handle those situations. And I see another question from Katie. We have minor children. We have a designated financial trustee, different than who our kids would go to. We did this so both sides of the family were represented. Is this a bad idea? Let's do that question first, and then there's another question after that. Barbara, can you talk about this minor children issue?
Happily, yes, because I neglected to mention that the other piece that your will does is it can name a guardian of any minor children. And that person is the person who I describe them as the the second best parent for your child, right? You're the best parent. Who would be the second best parent for your child? Who would have the physical custody of your child if something happened to you? There are definitely people who like to have the trustee different from the guardian. And I will say that that is not a bad idea because that is what my husband and I did until our kids aged out and we didn't have to worry about that anymore. But there is a nice check and balance, I think, that comes along with that, where the guardian has the immediate knowledge of the needs of the child, but then they've got the trustee to kind of bounce that off of. So child turns 16, they need a car to get to work, and the kid's bugging the guardian for that. How much was that car, Sandy? $67,000 car. You can have a trustee then sort of be a little bit of the bad guy and say, no, 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 we're not going to go look at a brand new car. We're going to go look at a used Honda, right? And at the end of the day, I'm sorry, I'm jumping ahead of myself here. There are certainly other people that feel that it should be the same person because the guardian has the immediate knowledge of the needs of the child, their financial needs, and they can meet them right away, and they don't have to go in and check with anybody else. I think it boils down to making sure that you're just picking the right people for the right job. And a lot of us don't have one person that fits all of those characteristics, that they're going to be that best second parent for your child, and that they also have the financial acumen and the administrative knowledge and the tax knowledge to be the trustee. If you do, that's great. If you don't, then I think that there's some real advantages to having that check and balance and have it be different people. So I hope that answered your question. Okay.
I'll do a check and balance story for you too, because I have a gazillion stories. I was the trustee and for a child's trust, and it was a very sizable trust. And her uncle was the guardian, and he would come in and see me every year and say, this is how much money we need for her, and this is where it's going to go. And we would pay directly to the school. She was in a private school, so but he would give us all the information, and that was all fine, and it all worked for about 3 years. And then he came in and he said, now we need this, and so this much for the school, and he went through the whole thing, and a reasonable clothing allowance, and I think we helped build an addition onto his house so that this child could live there. I mean, there were some really generous kinds of things that happened here. But then there was the $70,000 request so that we could go on a vacation. I'm like, where's she going to go for $70,000? I mean, that's a heck of a vacation. Well, no, I mean, she's going to go with us, but we can't go. We don't have enough money to pay for that. So it's going to be all of us are going to go on this vacation. I'm like, well, no, you can't enrich your own family because you're the guardian of this child. We can pay expenses that your family incurs on her behalf, like getting her a decent bedroom and stuff, but taking a whole family on vacation, this just doesn't work. And so then he said, well, you think we should just send her on vacation by herself? And I'm like, no, I think you have to look at this as she's a member of your family, and you have to decide what you can afford to do together. And we can pay her portion, but we can't pay for your whole family to go on vacation together. So that was another good check and balance kind of thing that happened there. A question in here is, are there trustee coaches? I can't remember, Katie, I think. I'm currently a trustee for my sister's trust, and I feel like I've had to learn so much on my own. I'm sure you have, Katie. I'm sure you have. Would love to have someone to check in with. I don't know of any trustee coaches. I think there are a ton of attorneys that act as trustee coaches. Barbara can probably speak more to that than I can. Katie, if you ever want to talk to somebody, you can call me. I'll have coffee with you anytime and talk. But Barbara, how about, do you know anything, trustee coach?
Yeah, I don't know of anybody that kind of bills themselves as a trustee coach, although it's a really intriguing idea. It is part of what we do as an estate planning attorney, is to help out with individuals and actually a lot of corporations. We represent most of the big banks in town because even though they have a lot of experience and their own legal departments, they've got questions and issues that come up that they want an outside attorney's opinion on. And so we're brought into that. Um, I would encourage you to do coffee with Sandy regularly. She is a fantastic mentor. I can tell you that from firsthand experience. But otherwise, finding a good lawyer that when you have questions, you can call them. You can maybe do an annual checkup with them to make sure that all the tax work's getting done and that you're keeping the accountings correctly and all that kind of stuff is a good idea and something that I think all trustees need to be cognizant of because it goes towards your liability. And trustees, unfortunately, have a lot of liability. And it can be a really scary place to be. So finding someone who you can talk to and make sure that all of the check boxes are getting done, it's a good idea.
Okay, Barbara, here's another one I think it's for you. Where do you find a trust administrator? Is the lawyer who put my revocable trust together a trust administrator?
So the trustee or the trust administrator, the trustee is the person that you've got named in your documents. A lot of lawyers will take on this position. A lot of them won't. I've been at 3 law firms now. 2 of the law firms I was at, they would not let me be a trustee for anybody outside of a close family member. My current firm has a slightly different take on that situation, so it really depends. And lawyers aren't always the best people for that job anyway. So I think with most people, they kind of start with their core circle of people. And if there's nobody within that core circle of people that has the requisite skill set and characteristics, then you start kind of moving out. But what I think people realize quickly is that this is a very big job that you're asking somebody to take on. So you're probably not going to ask your second cousin that you haven't seen for 10 years to do this, right? It's going to be somebody who is a really key person in your life. Once you kind of go outside of that key group and maybe that second round, if there's really nobody there, that's when we start talking to clients about, is this a job for a professional trustee, whether that's an individual, whether that's like a Wells Fargo, a US bank, all of the major banks in town have a trust unit. And is that something that they should be taking on? Because when you're talking about bringing in a professional trustee, you're really balancing the cost of doing that along with the skill set that they bring, and sometimes there's just no other option. Who is the trust administrator? Look in your documents and see who's named as the trustee. But if it's not your lawyer's name mentioned right there in the document, then they're probably not the person. But it is a conversation to have with your estate planning attorney about who would make a good trustee, personal representative, healthcare agent, any of these, so that you're really educated on what are the skill sets that are needed so that you can make an appropriate decision. And if you just don't have anybody in your life that fits all of those requirements, then talking about some alternatives like a Wells Fargo, US Bank kind of situation.
I'm hoping that answered the question. I thought you did a nice job. Thank you, Barbara. Are there any other questions? We're coming to the end of an hour and we can keep going. Okay, Dennis Fornicki, what is the current value of the Bethlehem Foundation total this year and how much is distributed or what percentage is distributed each year? I believe that the current value of the foundation is about $6 million. Up until last year, our distribution plan was that we only spent the income. We have changed that. So we have a 3-year, 12-quarter rolling average. And every January, we, as a foundation, decide how much will be distributed. It's usually between 4% and 8%. The percentage this year is 6%. I think I have all that right.
You-
I'm
you
sure I
have-
have all that right, actually.
The rolling average as of January was 5.25 million. And
Yes.
so 6% translates to $315,000 to be distributed this year. And that will hopefully go up each year.
Yeah, we moved to that method. It's a very common method for distribution. We moved to that method because the point of this money is to get it out and working. And we all agree on that. So this year, the number is 6%, 315,000. And I'm happy to talk to anybody about how we make those decisions and what kind of grants we do. I chair the grant committee, so I happen to know a lot about that. Other questions? Anything else that anyone would like to talk about? I'm not seeing anything in the chat. Maybe we'll just wrap this up now. It's been an hour. I think we're doing great. Thank you again for joining us this evening. If you have further questions or you'd like to talk through some ideas, I'm happy to visit with you over coffee or on the phone. Naomi will send a little follow-up with some more information. It will include contact information for both Barbara and I, as well as David Porter, who's another Bethlehem attorney who does estate and end-of-life planning. I often talk with people who have some ideas, but before they actually talk to an attorney, I can kind of help you get thoughts organized, and I'm free, no cost. And last, if you have any ideas about future events that you'd like to see the foundation do, we would love to hear from you. We would like to really start increasing the whole financial perspective and financial knowledge of the congregation if we can figure out a good way to do that. So let us know. We're happy to talk to you at any time. And what is the price range for setting up a trust? Holy cow. Dennis, I'm going to tell you that depends on how complicated your trust situation is. I mean, your attorney's going to have to charge for the drafting, and it just depends on how complicated it is.
Thank you very much for tuning in to this event, Planning Well, a conversation about faith, family, and legacy. If you have questions or need additional information, please contact us at 612-208-6447 or by email to office, OFFICE, at blcfoundationmn.org. Office at blcfoundationmn.org. We are happy to connect. Have a great day.